Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for your wonderful leadership of the series at Georgia Tech. I thank the Speedwell Foundation and Mike and Jenny Messner for their generous leadership in this important initiative and the work that they are doing around the country. And it's great to be with a longtime colleague, Jess Zimbabwe. We aspire to be a great nation, and a nation of great towns and cities. And great towns and cities are those that belong to everyone, that are diverse and robust and grow together and not apart. I served for the length of time, as Alan said, and watched the changes in America. When I was elected in the 70s, people were fleeing the urban centers in massive amounts. And there was a question about the future of the American city and its downtowns, its heart, and would there be some other model to be developed to reform that. And now, of course, we see the challenge that we have before us of cities not suffering because of flight, but challenged because of there is a loss of diversity and the presence of dislocation. So I'll talk tonight briefly about some of our initiatives. And Charleston is a small American city, but it is an American city. It's a real place of opportunities of great success and failure. We started working on the challenge of vacant lots in our city as it was marked with disinvestment, and wanted to build affordable housing on these vacant lots. This is what houses look like in Charleston in those neighborhoods. They were frame, addressed the sidewalk. But in the 50s and 60s, when they built affordable housing, they built that. Ugly as can be, bore no relationship to the neighborhood, and kind of acted as if it was just fulfilling an obligation. Well, we got to do some affordable housing, and often they'd put a cyclone fence around it so you'd know that the neighborhood wasn't safe and no one should really want to live there to begin with. So we were determined to prove that you could build attractive, new, affordable housing, and selected a young architect, and he designed this. It fit in. It was perfect. It was affordable. It was housing. So armed with that success, we had received a grant for new public housing. This was a long time ago when we were building public housing. And the Housing Authority was so excited, they said, Mayor, we know just where to put the new project. This was in the late 70s. And I said, well, we're not going to build any more projects. And, these things, brick monoliths that bore no relationship to the city or any accumulated lessons of Western civilization about towns and cities and community. I said, we're going to scatter the new public housing on vacant lots. And they looked at me like I was nuts. But I insisted that's what we were going to do. And then we started picking the vacant lots. And that was interesting because the average American doesn't wake up in the morning and turn to his spouse and say, honey, I sure hope we can get us some public housing next door on that vacant lot. So there was debate in the neighborhoods about where it would go, and we finally solved that problem and worked it out. And then we picked the architect. They came up with the designs, ugly as sin, and we fired those architects, hired other architects, and then that's what was built. Public housing, owned by the Housing Authority, very poor people living there, provided funds by the federal government, but it fit in with the neighborhood. It blended in perfectly. When we were opening these, I went to a reception at the president of one of our college's home, and a server came up to me and a crush of people at a cocktail party and just, kind of weaving through to offer me something to eat or drink. And she leaned over and she whispered and she said, Mayor Riley, I want to thank you. And I said, what's that for, ma'am? She says, because Monday I'm moving into 7 Marion Street. not Unit 6. I'm moving into 7 Marion Street. That was one of these. And it's so beautiful. And I thought back then, maybe with just a few syllables of a thank you, the prospective tenant of public housing, and it beats the rats in the rain, but never used the word beautiful before. And the fact of the matter is, that in city building, there's never any excuse under any circumstances whatsoever to build or cause to be built anything that doesn't add to the beauty of a neighborhood. So we did lots and lots of these scattered around the city. This is another example, just blended in perfectly. You can't tell them. And you know where the public housing, the scattered site units are now, pretty substantial and expensive new homes, several $100,000 or more. But the housing authorities building with those subsidized housing units with people of modest resources will always be there, and that helps make for a great neighborhood. We worked hard to keep the bulldozer out, and this was before the pressures of gentrification, so it really was a lot easier. We wouldn't tear anything down, no matter what. We used a lot of community development money, did a few hundred of these, and just kept the wrecking ball away to preserve the scale and the fabric and the texture and the history and the reality of these neighborhoods for people who'd lived there. They kept the ownership, and we put substantial money in and bring new neighbors in that had been in the neighborhood before, new homeowners, and turn the tide in these neighborhoods before the real pressure of gentrification began. Back when we were doing this, really very few people opted to live in these neighborhoods to begin with. I took these, I just love these pictures of a person of modest resources having a third-floor piazza overlooking the 19th century roofscape of the city. We worked throughout our city in the urban areas and in kind of somewhat suburban areas. We developed home-occupied and homeowner initiatives, historic substantial rehabilitation initiatives. These were registered, were eligible for the National Register of Districts, and kept them from being torn down and made them affordable housing. We developed lots and lots of different new nonprofit initiatives with churches or other organizations, and new home ownership initiatives. These were freedmen's cottages. That's what they were called. They were what African Americans could acquire after the Civil War when they could first legally own land. It was one story of what we call a Charleston single house. But they were, the neighborhood was obviously run down. Hurricane Hugo came through in '89 and about knocked them out. But we knew we had to save them at all costs. So we brought in Habitat and some church organizations and restored them as for affordable housing, home ownership, and save the neighborhood. And then that showed us the building type. We had developed a wonderful homeless shelter, just amazing, with nonprofit and all kinds of wonderful initiatives that all of you know that great homeless organizations can provide. But we were looking for the transitional housing type. So someone's been in the shelter and they've got a little bit of a job and can move out of the shelter with a little bit of money, and so we needed a little place for them, So the transitional housing, so I hired a young architect, and that's what he designed. You come out of the shelter, and that won an award from the AIA. You just can never in a city say it's just. I mean, that's just, no, you never say it's just. If a human being can see it, it should add to the beauty of the neighborhood, as I've said. Then with our public housing neighborhoods, projects that we would call, we kept them all, but for one that was contaminated. It became a Superfund site. It's a long story, but my housing authority director had the wisdom to eschew Hope 6 for Charleston. Now, in many places, the very dense public housing complexes just were not workable, perhaps. But we kept every single public housing apartment that we had and worked to restore them all. And that was I didn't know back then how important a decision that was because we kept them all, so we have that infrastructure, that resource intact that we build neighborhoods around. So this I could show you hundreds of them, but each one was made more attractive. We had a great police department, made sure the neighborhoods were safe for people who lived there, and had great tenant organizations and all of that. Then with new neighborhoods, which is so important, you have a plan for that. So this was a new community, Daniel Island. The owners had figured that they would build a gated community, and have a wonderful couple of golf courses and passes to get in. And I told them we could do that. It would be a real live place, including a lot of public parks and public places, and including affordable housing. So on Daniel Island, we worked, and there's a church on one corner, which is terrific, and this wonderful affordable housing neighborhood. And then the housing authority, we got them to give land to the housing authority. So the housing authority has public housing apartments on Daniel Island, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. The 3 bedrooms are very important because you've got families of modest means that have 3 or 4 children, and that's really great. We wrap this up quickly, but each initiative we attacked with vigor. We didn't know that time wasn't on our side, for sure. But this one on the Radcliffe Manor was one that I knew time wasn't on our side because it was a part of a city that was starting to come back. And it was an old school. It was actually a school, Immaculate Conception School, which was a Catholic school for African Americans back when schools were all segregated. But it could have gone so quickly to a private condo deal, and we knew that, and we got someone to come in and work with us, and so we transformed it into affordable housing for elderly, and it's just a great location. It's on the bus line, it's near downtown, it's a place to shop and all like that, and so we worked with these others, similar circumstances. We knew we really had a limited amount of time, and these are King's Crossing. I took this picture a few weeks ago. I was doing a presentation, and just kind of heartwarming. The guy knew me, gave me the peace sign, but there he was, a person of modest resources in a nice neighborhood in Charleston, chilling out on his porch. We had a lot of first-time home buy initiatives and home ownership initiatives, and what we realized was this. We work out a great deal, and the first-time home buyer buys a new home, and you have to cut the ribbon, and that is thrilling. But 10 years later, they sell that house, and the market's gone up, and it's not even close to affordable anymore. So there's no permanence in that. So I challenged our brilliant legal department to come up with a easement that would somebody could acquire the first-time home buyer, but when they sold it, the covenant would allow them only the appreciation that the cost of living had achieved during the period of time. So if it's 10 years, so it stays in that same market level, if you will, and then we created a commission that then vets the next first-time home buyer that never owned a home before, and they fit with income. So we've done a number of these, and this one on the left was, and I got to wrap this up, that had been a privately owned low-income housing development. There was no federal money in it, nothing we could do. They took it down, but we arm wrestled them to make sure, publicly arm wrestle, that we would get something out of it. So we got the opportunity to build these first-time home buyer condos, And so there are many others. I'll wrap up with this because I know time is short. This was a house that was admittedly not in very good shape, and the building official called me one morning and said, "Mayor, we got to let 17 Fishman Street come down." I said, "No, we don't." He said, "Mayor, it's leaning." And actually the utility pole was vertical. It was shifting a little bit. And I said, "Well, let's put some money in it." He said, "We'll fall in the house next door and to kill the people." I said, "We'll move the people out anyway." We put some money in it and restored it somewhat. It looked like that, pretty bad. And then the housing authority the highway department was putting in a new bridge and needed to widen the road, and they wanted to tear it down. We wouldn't let them. So to make a long story short, this house had 3 lives. It was a corner building. Corners are very important. So we worked out a deal with the housing authority, a private developer, and this little neighborhood was transformed by saving this one house. There are 4 apartments. It's owned by the housing authority in there. A couple of other buildings, 2 apartments owned by the housing authority. Then these are market rate houses in this neighborhood. And then some of our first-time home buyer initiatives as well. It's just a little neighborhood, but you work on the little scale and the big scale. But that one little neighborhood, majority of the apartments owned by the housing authority, there's some market rate people, first-time home buyer. So in conclusion, the important thing about keeping the urban places diverse and for all people, and we don't lose a generation of those, is that a city is a place for everyone at best. We know that. We see the great cities of the world, any great city in America. You pass the call to humanity as you walk along the streets. But it is, what Mike and Jenny are so committed to, it is in the public realm. It is in the public spaces in cities where people congregate and share equally. They own it together. So we built this waterfront park in an area that no one would go to a long time ago, and it's a great public space, and we have this wonderful fountain, and the kids play in it, and the kids huddle and celebrate, and they're celebrating a cool spray on a hot August day, but they're also celebrating being a part of a community. Thank you very much.